Hello, and welcome back to the Age of You podcast, a sweet secret to longevity. My name is Rina, and today I will be your guide into the topic of chronic disease and the role yoga played in our guest's health journey. When talking about chronic diseases and longevity, we know that lifestyle plays a key role in both prevention and recovery. And this is why I think that our speaker today has a very unique perspective as a nutritional therapist and a yoga coach who's also experienced life with chronic disease. So, without further ado, I am happy to introduce Anastasis Tzanis.
Nice meeting you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming to our podcast. So, to start with, Anastasis, you've had a very interesting life, and I'm curious to hear how your journey with yoga began.
Sure. So at the time I was working in banking. I was working as a currency derivatives trader, and similar with many people, the reason why I wanted to start yoga is so that I get more flexible. However, what I found out is that there are many more benefits, and there were other aspects of yoga that I was finding more beneficial than just the increase of my flexibility, which is what got me hooked up. And ultimately, I end up falling down the path of taking it a little bit more seriously, becoming a yoga teacher, and ultimately moving on from banking.
Before we continue talking about yoga, I first want to touch upon your experience with IBS. And for a bit of context, IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome, might sound similar to IBD, or inflammatory bowel disease, which also affects the digestive tract. But while with IBD, you can usually see very clear signs of damage which have been caused by inflammation when looking inside the gut. With IBS, usually there isn't much to be seen, and this is because IBS is a functional disorder. But looking back, you can imagine how the fact that there wasn't any clear structural abnormality, that there wasn't any clear damage, would have made IBS very difficult to categorize. And definitely, looking back there, it has been neglected quite a lot in research and even stigmatized in clinical practice, largely because for a long time it was thought of as a purely psychosomatic illness. That means that many people believed that it was only caused by mental factors. And so you can imagine how this would have impacted the medical care and assistance that was offered to these patients. Today, we have progressed from that understanding, and we know that there are definite risk factors such as genetic predispositions, diet, microbiome, but we are still a long way from actually truly understanding IBS and even applying the knowledge we currently have in medical practice. So, Anastasis, I know you have some thoughts on this issue, and I am interested to hear about your experience of getting diagnosed and getting treated for IBS.
So, just to give a little bit of a background to the listeners, it was the time while I was studying nutritional therapy that I got the IBS, and it was not until I graduated that I managed to recover, let's say, from it. And I think that goes to show, I think we will come back to that later on, is that the ideas that sometimes are promoted in nutritional courses are not exactly necessarily the ideal diets. I think a lot of the times an average sane person's opinion about nutrition is probably a lot healthier than some of the theories that are discussed in nutritional courses. So, without wanting to accuse anyone, I may want to. I should probably share some information that maybe some of the listeners may find useful in regards to how I experienced IBS, how some of my clients experienced IBS, and some of the common themes that I have seen contributing and helping recover it. So ultimately, IBS almost gets classified under three, based on symptoms actually. and it's under three different categories. Some people will have will be predominantly constipated. Some people will be predominantly having diarrhea, and some people will be fluctuating between the two, which is usually the most common of the three symptoms. The reality is, because it is more based on symptoms, and our life is not very consistent. It goes through periods of us feeling better and having more stable health, and us getting a little bit more down, whether it is from environmental factors or from things that go on in our life. It is very difficult to diagnose, like you said. With IBD, you can have some markers that as you said, it is like um, a yes or a no situation. I would say anyone that has, but with all of that, anyone that has irregular bowel movements would potentially classify as someone that suffers from IBD. It is worth keeping in mind that this is a thing to remember, because ultimately we operate on a spectrum. It's not that we have IBS, I meant, or we don't. We can have a very severe, advanced stage of it, or we can have very moderate symptoms. Usually, most people will ignore symptoms until they become quite intense. And that was the case for me. I was pretty much ignoring any fluctuations in my bowel movements up until they were becoming quite debilitating, let's say. We'll speak later on, I know, about the diet, so I'm not going to speak more about that. This is the thing that I have seen with a lot of my clients, that again, they tend to ignore fluctuations in their bowel movements, in the quality of their bowel movements, I should say, and they only seek advice when things have gone downhill. Um, in terms of helping one's diet, helping one's symptoms and recovering from IBS, I think it is, again, we will go more into detail in regards to dieting, but I think it is it is important to understand that it is curable. It is something that we can recover, and while dietary adjustments are necessary, they are not the only ones that are needed. And I would say that having some tests done, although the tests may not necessarily give you a yes or a no answer in regards to whether you have IBS or not, they may still shed some light in terms of contributing factors, such as imbalances in the microbiome, the presence of candida, the presence of bacteria. And again, it has to be a case by case scenario. So in some case, I would say that even a serum lipid test may be appropriate, or even a hormonal test might be appropriate. But I would first start, if I was having any symptoms, with a stool analysis test and move from there.
So before we get into more technical details about diet, I wanted to first talk about perspective. And speaking from my personal experience of having autoimmune diseases, I can say that I experienced a big shift in perspective after getting diagnosed. The whole way I viewed health and what I understood to be healthy habits changed. And all of a sudden, experiencing constant symptoms and living with a scary diagnosis really forces you to reassess your priorities. And I think for many people, getting diagnosed with a chronic disease can be a wake-up call and might influence them to change their habits. But I'm curious, for you as a person who was already so committed to a healthy lifestyle, how did this diagnosis change your perspective and your priorities?
The priorities, there was not a change in priorities, because as you mentioned, at the time I was immersed into a health journey. I was studying nutritional therapy. I was actually, it was almost like difficult to take a distance from all the things that I was exposed to, but after all, it was necessary in order to assess and make some correct decisions. Um, I think diagnoses are very useful. I think we have to be also careful with diagnosis. I think I have seen nowadays diagnoses are given very easily, even though sometimes the evidence are not uh, exactly there, or there are some indications, but they are not conclusive, I should say, evidence. In my case, I ended up um, diagnosing, let's say, myself. I end up, you know, I end up ordering my own tests, and I also seek other people's advice. So I seek the advice of other healthcare practitioners. But the realization came from me in terms of my symptoms. I would say, in regards to your question, diagnoses are great. They can be, it can help people take action, but as long as these people don't marry the diagnosis and they don't identify with the disease, because that's very, very common and it is not helpful at all. People to identify that they have IBS and they have to live for the rest of their life with it, or they have any other autoimmune condition and they have to live the rest of their life with it. I think this is a very dangerous trap that is people a lot of times fall into.
No, I absolutely agree. And I want to bring something up which might be very encouraging for our listeners. So correct me if I'm wrong, but the first time you measured your biological age through GlycanAge test, you were 37 and your biological age was 45. And then 3 years later, when you were 40, you retook the test and your biological age went down to 28. So what did you do in these 3 years? What happened?
Yeah, obviously, within a 3 years period, a lot of things usually happen. I can speak a lot about what I did in terms of my diet. I can speak a lot about lifestyle change that took place. But ultimately, I think that what was going on was, again, at the time that I took the first test was the end of a lot of let's say, experimentation with dieting, and probably the second stage of the second time of doing the test, there was a lot less adherence to strict diets. Having said that, even when I was following strict diets, and I can get into the details, I was still um, doing a lot of lab tests to support that they were healthy for me. But there you go. When I did the GlycanAge test, it showed that I was still not in line with my biological age was not the same with my physiological age. So I think it was basically the first time was a time where I was working more with, let's say, extremes and cliches and diets that often are promoted as super diets. And the second time, I was much more following a lifestyle and a diet that was having was closer to normal, if there is such a thing as normal. There was more close to, like, there was more moderation, let's say, in all different aspects of my life.
I'm very glad you brought up this idea of extreme dieting because elimination diets have become a very common approach to optimizing one's diet and one's health. But as it turns out, they might not always be the best choice for our gut microbiome. And our gut microbiome is a community of microorganisms which exist in our intestines and they hugely impact our health. So, as I understand, you took part in an experiment organized by Genova Diagnostics where they looked at the gut microbiomes of some of the top UK nutritionists and compared them to the microbiomes of 20 people in their lab who didn't really have the ideal diet, or rather, who were eating quite a lot of foods which might not be considered as healthy. And as I understand, they found some actually very interesting results. So, could you tell me about what they found?
So first of all, I should clarify that I didn't participate in the study, but this was something mentioned in a lecture that I attended from a researcher that came from Genova Diagnostics. But nonetheless, what you described was correct. And in a nutshell, the two groups, some that of them being nutritional therapists and some of them being like, let's call them average Joe in lack of a better term, following a very average diet, which included a few times a week, maybe burgers and chips. And they found that the second group would have a much more diverse, potentially more healthy microbiome. And I think really, so this was the study. Like I said, that was something that stayed with me for a while. And actually, it ties in with my story in the sense that when I look at my GlycanAge in the second test, I was following more the diet that these people, living a regular life were following. While in the first time that I did the GlycanAge test, I was more living according to the ideal versions of what was promoted during my course, my training. Um, I think um, there is an element of that I need to clarify here. I'm not trying to say that what is taught in nutritional therapy courses is bad information. I'm very grateful that I attended one and I became a nutritional therapist. But I think it's also worth pointing out that a lot of the times, and I have seen that by the way, not only in nutritional therapy, but in a lot of alternative medicine practices, is we try to become God. And we try to turn any mm, food or diet or protocol, whether it is in I've seen it really in everything that I've been involved, really, from breath work to um, yoga to aromatherapy to becoming the ultimate solution to all man's problems. So unless someone has like three portions of broccoli a week, they have no chance of being healthy. I don't think that this holds true. And in an extreme scenario, bringing my answer back to your question, when we come down to elimination diets, which unfortunately is the majority of the diets that now exist, the majority of the diets start with all the list of things that you should not eat, are basically going down a path where they're like eliminate eliminating sources of nutrients from one's health. I use the following example. I say that when we start following strict elimination diets, we play the card game or the health game with less cards. In what sense? Imagine like we are playing a card game and I'm not allowed to use any spades or any kings or any queens. I'm not a card player, so probably I'm not exactly accurate with how I'm describing my example. But if I'm going to have less cards, I have less chances to win. And it's just going to be the same thing if I am going to be trying to help myself live a healthy life, but at the same time, I'm saying I'm not allowed to eat nightshades and I'm not allowed to eat foods high in lectins, and I'm not allowed to eat foods high in tannins, and I'm not, and so on and so forth, right? Or you can say like, someone is vegetarian and like they're not allowed to eat animal protein, or someone is like following a carnivore diet and they're not allowed to eat vegetables. So, all of these are great theories, and for sure there is some validity behind these approaches. It's worth though questioning for how long these approaches are valid for, and yeah, for whom, yeah. Otherwise, it's just theories.
No, exactly. And just to clarify for our listeners, so what they saw in this experiment was that people who were eating these restrictive diets and leading these healthy lifestyles had a much lower diversity of their microbes. And we know that a rich microbiome is really necessary to maintain a healthy life and to recover from many diseases. So that goes to show. But I mean, obviously, diet has become such a polarizing topic recently because we have such extreme options. And probably the reason why it is so polarizing is because there is no single diet which is optimal for every person. So, what advice would you give to someone on how to choose the best diet based on the stage of their life and their lifestyle?
This is a very good question, which unfortunately, in order to give to pay justice to it, I will need to give very generic answers. But if you want me to get into detail, I can do that. I'm not. It's the only reason why I'm not getting into detail is because it's a very case by case. But I'm happy to give specific examples. So first of all, I think it all depends on what are the symptoms. I say that because I have had clients that came to me and they said they want to improve their diet when in reality they didn't have any symptoms, or they didn't have any goal that they wanted to achieve in terms of their health. It's not that they were like preparing for some kind of life event, whether it was a sports event or other event that they wanted to change their body composition. They just wanted to be healthier, but they were already very healthy. Now, so in these cases, I think that then we need to divorce the idea that there is this perfect diet. I believe that people can live on very diverse diets, very different diets. I think you and me can live very healthily on diets that look quite different. However, assuming that someone has a goal, and the goal can be dealing with a problem, a health problem, or improving their body composition, preparing more for a sports event, whatever the situation is, I think then the approach that I would suggest is to look what the diet is at the moment, and based hopefully on someone that has experience opinion, start making gradual changes. I think a lot of people know that drastic changes in the diet are usually quite hard to comply with, and a lot of the times they don't last for long. So my approach would be working with a healthcare professional, working with an experienced nutritional therapist, try to make the adjustments that are able for someone to follow and stick to them. If you see anyone that has long-term events, whether they are competing for bodybuilding competitions, whether they are transforming their diet because of disease, the ones that have long-term results are the ones that do changes on ongoing basis for long periods of time. They are not the ones that they drop the calories or they turn things upside down overnight and they try to become a hero, let's say, in 1 week or 1 month.
Now that we've mentioned healthy lifestyles, healthy habits, I think that it's very important to note that there can be too much of a good thing. For instance, we know from looking at glycans that overexercising, particularly in a combination with a very restrictive diet, can actually have a very detrimental effect. It can increase your chronic inflammation. So, do you have any experience yourself or any experience with your clients where they might have practiced healthy habits in excess?
Apart from having worked with other people, I think I'm the best case. So I might as well speak about myself, not because I think I'm so interesting, but because I think I'm an extreme case of getting carried away and obsessing about with things. It's a little bit like if you want to, I think it's probably a little bit more in my genetics. People with with my genetic makeup, such as mutation in the MAOA gene, will have a predisposition for a few things, including Parkinson's disease that both of my parents had, but also becoming workaholic or becoming getting carried away with overdoing things, and the diet being one of them. thank God I never had I never overdid compulsive things such as gambling or other things that can be detrimental for my lifestyle. But with food, I can definitely say that I have got carried away with doing too much of a good thing, as you said. So I know firsthand that this is possible, and usually there is a price that people like me end up paying, because ultimately, too much of a good thing is probably not necessarily good anymore. And what the only thing I can say in for these cases is that ultimately the way that you are, if your body is seeking a lot of one thing, it might be for a reason. So let's say that someone is craving a lot of protein. Let's bring it back to the diet. I think there might be a period of high demands on protein for this individual. They might be exercising a little bit more than usual. They may be even like detoxification processes are very demanding in terms of protein, something that is often overlooked. Someone that is craving whatever someone is craving too much of, it is worth analyzing and having a think about why this is the case. And ultimately, they can work with the diet or with supplements or with lifestyle, or ideally with all of the above, to get out of this loop. But for sure, as you said, in some individuals, this overdoing of things comes very natural. I raise my hand, I'm one of them. And if, depending on what this overdoing is, because it can be overdoing of eating chocolate, or overdoing of eating whatever, or it is for a reason, and it needs to be addressed and analyzed and work out of.
And so we've come back to yoga. So I'm curious, first of all, for people who might be starting now, or even for people who are looking to optimize their yoga practice. In your experience, are there any specific types of yoga practices which might be most beneficial for longevity and long-term health?
I think yoga has a massive benefit in terms of longevity and anti-aging. No wonder we have this, at least most people, these images of old people that they are still quite flexible, or they practice yoga. I think the more time passes and as yoga increases in popularity, the more we'll see individuals like that. Um, the way to approach it is to be put into perspective with everything else that one does. I think for a lot of people think that, in order to get the benefits out of yoga, they need to be practicing many times a week. I think that again, we need to start looking at what someone is attracted to at this stage. So I would have clients I work with that they have a very physical lifestyle, and they still manage to fit in 1 or 2 sessions a week. But they still exercise a lot. They will go for cycles. Maybe they are retired, and they have plenty of time to do lots of other hikes and other activities. If someone does not have a training regime that they follow at the moment, I think one can easily practice 3 to 5 or even more times a week yoga. If people have not practiced yoga until now, I need to tell them that yoga is not one thing. That's a very common misconception that people have. That's a misconception that I had in the beginning. Actually, yoga is very diverse, and yes, there are a lot of teachers that they teach only one style, and that's absolutely fine, but there are many others, including myself, that they approach it from a more diverse perspective. They are happy to teach different styles, and in that case it's not as repetitive, and it can still serve a lot of different goals apart from just flexibility. If one wants to get into the juice of anti-aging, I think apart from thinking of flexibility, they can be thinking of certain poses that I personally think will challenge not only flexibility but also our proprioception, our cognitive functions, and yeah, I think this will go a long way towards aging slowly and healthily.
And obviously, a major part of yoga, and perhaps a misconception about yoga, is that it's only about exercise, and actually, breathing is an incredible part of yoga. So, can you introduce the idea and the benefits of breathing exercises to our listeners?
For sure. So, as you pointed out, apart from the physical aspect of yoga, breathing is another massive area. And again, breathing, the yoga tradition is very rich, and there are many breathing exercises, a lot of which have stayed alive and benefited thousands of people over the years. There is, if someone is listening and is interested in all of that, there is. I would suggest they start with one breathing exercise a day for 5 minutes. Again, this can be linked to what life they live. So, for example, let's say that someone is having a stressful life, they can be starting with a breathing exercise that will help calm down their nervous system. Or if someone finds that they have stage fright, they can do exercises that they can help them deal with that. There are breathing exercises that can actually help women deal with the menstrual cycle and avoid overbreathing, which is very common, or pain that's common towards ovulation. So it can be very tailored, very specific to the individual. Ultimately, one exercise a day for a few minutes can go a long way. And I know that it can help people of all stages of life, because I have worked with people as young as 7 years old, like young kids that they were into sports, and very old individuals that way past menopausal, that they benefited from breathing. So highly recommend that as part of an anti-aging protocol.
What advice would you give for people who are hoping to improve their breathing technique?
So one of the first things that one can do, which is quite simple but it can go a long way, is to start paying attention to how they breathe. And of course, education can go a long way. So understanding what is the ideal breathing, which is a lot of the times confused, can be beneficial. So if you start paying attention to the way you breathe, and you notice that your breath is loud, you notice that your mouth is open, you notice that your mouth is dry, maybe first thing in the morning you feel thirsty, all of these are signs that potentially your breathing is not ideal. Ultimately, we have a nose because we need to be breathing from the nose, and this is where I would suggest people shift their attention to. The way to breathe from the nose, though, of course, and switch to becoming a nose breather, may require a little bit of training, so maybe some exercises will be useful. But an easy hack that people can follow that are listening is to ensure nasal breathing during the night as well, and to ensure that they can be using any of the tapes that are widely available. They can source on through Amazon or other dispensaries online, where they ensure that they are breathing through the nose at night, and they will not probably be noticing the benefits even after 1 or 2 nights of taping their mouth.
And obviously, talking about all of these healthy habits which one can implement to improve their lifestyle, we have to acknowledge that most of them actually take time before you can see changes. So, do you have any advice from your personal experience or from working with your clients on how to keep going, how to prevent yourself from having cheat days or giving up altogether?
Yeah, I would suggest is to try to link what they are doing with what they want. So the resolutions are great, and the goal setting is great, but if it is disconnected with what we want in life and our mission in life, it is very unlikely, I should say, to stick to it. And that's what part of my job is, when I'm working with my clients, is to become very aware of their life and their missions and their goals. Not because I'm a life coach, far from it, I'm not interested in becoming one, but because I know what we're really trying to address. Are we trying to improve one's breathing pattern because they are not having the energy to spend time with their kids? Are we trying to improve one's flexibility because they want to become more agile and enjoy more time with their partner that is more fit than them? And if you create an emotional attachment to the exercise and the practice and the habits that you want to adopt, I think that's great. Then it's very easy to stick to them. A lot of people are surprised when they find that sticking to habits that I give them are very easy compared to other attempts that I've taken before. But I always make sure that the changes that I'm asking them to do are very small, and they are very linked with things that are very relevant to their life, not to my life. We live different lives, don't we?
No, exactly. So obviously, this idea of personalized medicine and personalized treatment, but also personalizing your lifestyle. So we are nearing the end of this conversation, and I would like you to ask you, what would be your final message, takeaway tips for our listeners?
Ultimately, whatever approach that they follow, they need to be optimistic that they can that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Whether they are healthy and they want to improve their health, they set a goal higher than what they currently have, they should be optimistic, they should believe in it. If they are lacking health, or if they have found their GlycanAge being lower than what they wish, they are able to change things. There is always a brighter future ahead of us, if we need to believe in that. And from there on, take a systematic approach to that, hopefully by following some proven approaches to that, and leave for the side this trial and error, which a lot of the times is like not so, yeah, it can slow things down a lot. So these are the two things: believe and follow a systematic, proven approach.
Excellent, thank you. And for our listeners, if you would like to learn more about Anastasis and his work, there will be plenty of links in the description. But in particular, something that's coming up soon is the Breathing for Yoga course. And so, Anastasis, could you tell us a bit about what's happening?
So this is so we said already about how important I think breathing is, and I think this is at the heart of my work for the last 3 years. So, having studied with, having done the certifications with Wim Hof, and studied with Patrick McCone, some of your listeners may be aware of. In the last year, alongside Patrick, we are offering this course that delves not only into the biochemistry but also into the biomechanics of breathing. So ultimately, it comes down to improving one's posture and improving one's breath at the same time. And this is a course that we run a few times through the year. The next one is coming up. I think it starts in a week's time. But ultimately, this is a deep dive into breathing, and I think it is probably the best course that is out there on breath work, and people will be welcome to attend.
Excellent. The link will be in the description, as I said, and look out if you're not able to make this one, perhaps for the next one. Anastasis, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation.
Thank you very much, Rina.
And equally, if you are interested in finding out more about GlycanAge, their science, their products, go over to glycanage.com and you will find everything you need. Please don't forget to leave ratings and reviews for this episode and engage with us on social media. We'll be happy to see you there. All the links, as I said, will be in the description below. Thank you for listening and have a great day.